The snow had begun before midnight, and by the time Mara reached the edge of the pack's land, it was falling in dense, purposeful curtains that erased the road behind her. She did not look back. She had told herself she would not look back. And so she kept her eyes forward and her chin low, and let the cold do what cold always does. It told the truth. It said, "You have nothing left here." It said, "The warmth you thought you had was borrowed." It said, "Go." She had heard him with her own ears. That was the part she could not reason away. The part that sat in her chest like a stone that had been placed there deliberately and with care. She had been standing in the hallway outside the great room, still holding the 2 mugs of tea she had made for them both, still warm in her hands, and she had heard Caden's voice through the door, low and steady and utterly without hesitation, saying her name the way a man says the name of something he has already decided to put down. "McGraw isn't the one," he had said. "She was never the one. I don't know what you all thought you were seeing, but there's nothing there. She's not my mate. She never will be." The mugs had stayed warm in her hands for a long time after that. That was the strangest thing. She had stood in the hallway while the voices inside continued, and the fire crackled, and the snow began outside the high windows, and the ceramic had stayed warm against her palms, as if it did not know yet, as if it had not gotten the message. She had set them down on the floor of the hallway, both mugs side by side steaming gently, and then she had gone upstairs, packed her bag with the specific, quiet efficiency of someone who has done this before, who knows exactly which things matter and which things she has already been living without. The pack house was behind her now, lost in white. The road that led away from Thornvale wound through old-growth pine that closed overhead like cathedral arches, and under the trees the snow was thinner, and she could see where her boots were pressing into the frozen ground. Each step deliberate, each step a small declaration. She had her wool coat and her worn leather bag, and the $73 that had been in her emergency pocket since the autumn. She had her phone, though the battery was at 19%, and the signal out here was nothing more than a single, wavering bar. She did not have a plan. She had a direction, which was away, and for now that was enough. What she could not stop hearing, as she walked, was not the words. The words she could eventually catalog and file, and put somewhere. She did not have to look at every morning. What she could not stop hearing was the certainty in his voice, the absence of hesitation. She had listened for a crack in it. Some small falter that would have told her this was performance, that he was saying it for the council, or for the elder wolves, who had been pressing him about the question of his mate for the better part of 2 years. There had been no crack. His voice had been as smooth and final as a door being shut in an empty house. She had believed, God help her, she had believed that the bond was real. She had felt it in the way she felt her own heartbeat, that low, persistent pull toward him. The way the air in a room changed when he walked into it. The way she could find him in a crowd without looking. As if some part of her was always oriented in his direction, the way a compass needle orients toward north. She had believed the bond was real, because she had felt it with every animal instinct she possessed. And she was not a woman who trusted her instincts lightly. She had spent most of her life learning not to. She had been wrong. She had been spectacularly, humiliatingly, thoroughly wrong. The pine trees thinned as the road dipped down toward the valley floor. The snow was heavier here, and the wind had picked up, finding the gap between her collar and her ear with the precision of something that bore her a personal grudge. She pulled the coat tighter and kept walking. There was a town somewhere down the valley. She had driven through it once in the summer, months before she had come to Thornvale, before she had met Caden, before she had made the mistake of letting herself believe in something she could feel, but could not prove. The town had a diner and a gas station and some cluster of streets she had not explored. It was far enough. It would do. She was 3 miles from the pack house when she heard the sound behind her. Not footsteps, not exactly. Something moving through the trees that ran parallel to the road. Something large. Something that was not particularly trying to be quiet. Her stomach contracted. She did not stop walking. She made herself maintain exactly the same pace, the same stride, as if she had not heard it, as if the sound meant nothing, as if the back of her neck was not prickling with every animal instinct she had spent 27 years learning to suppress. She was still an omega, even now. Even walking away from a pack that had never fully been hers, she was still a woman with wolf blood and a wolf's awareness of what moved in the dark, and what was moving in the dark beside her was not small. She heard it stop when she stopped to adjust her bag strap. She heard it start again when she started walking. She was being followed with the casual confidence of something that was very sure of itself, and she could not decide yet whether to run or to turn and face it. And the indecision was its own kind of cold. She turned. The trees stood in the dark, the snow fell, nothing moved. And then at the tree line, a shape. And she knew the shape. She would have known it in absolute darkness. She would have known it by the particular architecture of shadow that it made. And her heart did something she did not give it permission to do. Something that was half fury and half a grief so acute it felt physical, like a stitch in her side. Caden stood at the tree line in human form, snow in his dark hair, his coat open despite the cold, in the way that wolves often stood when they had been running, their temperature already high. He looked at her, she looked at him. The snow fell between them like a judgment neither of them had asked for. She turned back to the road and kept walking. She heard follow, not in the trees now. On the road behind her, footsteps she would have recognized in a thunderstorm. He was not running, he was matching her pace, staying far enough back that it was not a pursuit, close enough that it was clearly deliberate. "Mara," he said. She did not answer, she did not slow. "Mara, stop." "I heard you," she said. She had not planned to say it. It came out flat and clean, the way a fact comes out when you are too tired to dress it up. "I was in the hallway. I heard everything. So there is nothing you need to explain to me, and nothing I need to stay and listen to. Go back to your pack, Caden." A pause in the footsteps behind her. Then they resumed. "I'm not going back without you." She stopped. She stopped because she could not walk and feel this at the same time. This particular species of rage, that was also, underneath it, the most profound disappointment she had ever known. She turned to face him. He was 10 feet back. He stopped when she stopped. His face in the dark and the snow was the face she had memorized without meaning to, had catalogued against her own better judgment over months of proximity. The line of his jaw, the scar above his eyebrow from something that had happened before she knew him, the way his eyes caught light and held it in that particular way, that had nothing to do with shifter ability and everything to do with the specific architecture of his face. She hated him for having that face. She hated herself for knowing it so well. "What do you want?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. Snow collected on his shoulders and he did not brush it away. "I want to explain," he said finally. "You explained very clearly," she said. "To the council, to the elders, to everyone in that room. I'm not your mate. I was never your mate. There's nothing there." She heard her own voice and was almost proud of how level it was. "I think that covers it." "It wasn't." He stopped. He pressed his mouth together. In the years she had known him, she had learned that this gesture meant he was choosing words carefully, that he was holding something back, not out of indifference, but out of some interior argument she was not privy to. She had used to find it endearing. She did not find it endearing now. "It wasn't what you think," he said. "What I think," Mara said, "is that you stood in front of the people who matter most in your world, and you told them plainly that I am nothing to you, and you meant it. I know what a lie sounds like, Caden. I've heard enough of them. What I heard tonight was not a lie." Something moved in his face. A fracture in something she had thought was solid. "You're wrong," he said. "Then tell me the true version," she said. "Right now in the snow, with no audience. Tell me the true version, and I will stand here and listen." He looked at her. The distance between them. 10 feet, the length of 2 easy strides. The distance she had stood in that hallway outside the great room door seemed to have a texture to it, seemed to press against both of them, from both sides. He was quiet for too long. She turned back to the road. "Wait," he said. "I'm done waiting," she said. And she meant it the way she had meant almost nothing in her life, from the deep root of herself. "I've been waiting since autumn for you, to say the thing you clearly can't say. I'm not angry about tonight. I want you to know that. What I heard tonight was clarifying. It saved me from waiting another year for something that was never going to happen." She started walking again. She made it 4 steps before he spoke, and what he said stopped her as effectively as a hand on her arm, though he had not moved. "I said it to protect you," he said. "And I know that sounds like exactly the kind of thing a man says when he has no better excuse. But it's the truth. Mara, it is the truth." The snow fell. Her breath made a cloud in the dark air. She did not turn around for a long moment. "From what?" she said. She kept her back to him. It was easier. "Protect me from what?" She heard him close the distance between them. "Not touching her. stopping a few feet back, so that she could feel the particular warmth of him that she had always been able to feel. That animal radiance that was part of what he was, part of what all wolves carried in them, but which she felt from him as something specifically calibrated to her, in a way she had never been able to explain to herself without using the words she was currently trying to set aside. From the council knowing, he said, from what they would do to an omega mate of an alpha king. There are laws, Mara. Old laws that I can't. A pause. I needed them to believe it was nothing. I needed them to stop looking. She turned. She looked at him. The 8 feet between them felt in this moment like the kind of geography that requires a decision. Alpha King, she said. He said nothing. She had known he was Alpha of Thornvale. She had known. He led the pack with authority that the other wolves deferred to, in a way that went beyond normal hierarchy. She had not known, had not been told, had not been able to confirm with any certainty what exactly that title implied in the larger architecture of shifter governance. What laws, she said. What happens to the omega mate of an alpha king? He looked at her steadily. The mate bond is absorbed into the pack covenant, he said, which means she belongs to the pack, formally, which means she can be used in negotiation, or held as a condition of political agreement, or... He stopped, pressed his mouth together again. I've watched it happen to other women. I've watched my father do it. I am not going to let it happen to you. Mara stood in the road with snow collecting in the wool of her coat, and tried to decide what to do with this information. It was the kind of thing that reordered everything, that made the last several months look different from the inside, that changed the shape of his silences. She was still angry. She was still cold. She was still holding the image of herself, standing in that hallway with 2 cups of tea. And it was still a painful image, but it had a different frame now. Why didn't you tell me? She said. Because telling you would have required admitting the bond existed, he said. And if the bond exists, it changes everything you're free to do. It changes every choice you have. I wasn't willing to do that without. He stopped again. He looked at her with something she had no better word for than honest. It was the kind of looking that costs something. I didn't want to take your choices away from you by naming it, even if it meant you believed I didn't feel it. Mara was quiet for a long time. The wind moved through the tops of the pines and sent a fall of snow from one of the high branches. You felt it, she said. It was not quite a question. Since the first day you came to Thornvale, he said. Since the moment you walked into the pack house kitchen looking for someone to tell you where to put your bags, and you smelled like cedar and cold air. And every single thought I had organized itself around you like a room rearranging its furniture around a fire. He exhaled slowly. Yes, I felt it. She did not say anything. She was learning, in this moment, that there are some things the body receives before the mind does, and that the body's response is often more honest. What she felt in her chest, when he said that was not triumph and not vindication. It was more like grief in reverse. Something that had been contracted tight releasing slowly, which hurt in its own way. The council knows I exist, she said. I've been living at the pack house for 4 months, attending dinners, helping in the kitchen, being present. As a visitor, he said. As someone we took in. That's a different category. They would have noticed. I think some of them have suspected, he said, which is why tonight happened. Elder Wren called the meeting specifically to press me on the question. She said there were indicators. She wanted me to confirm or deny. His jaw tightened. I denied, and she believed you. She has no choice but to accept my word, he said, for now. That doesn't mean it's over. Mara looked at him in the dark. He was standing in the road with snow in his hair, and his coat open, and his hands at his sides, which was how he stood when he was not performing anything, when he was stripped of the particular posture he wore as Pack Alpha. She had seen him stand like this only a handful of times. In the kitchen at 2 in the morning when neither of them could sleep. On the back porch in late autumn, watching the tree line. Now, in a road in a snowstorm, having followed her into the dark to say things she did not know she needed to hear. I'm still angry, she said. I know, he said. Hearing you say that, hearing you say my name like I was nothing. I know. His voice was quiet. I'm sorry, Mara. I'm sorry, I would have told you. When, she said. When would you have told me? He looked at her. The silence was not evasive. It was the silence of a man who does not have an answer he can be proud of. I don't know, he said. That's the honest answer. I don't know. I kept waiting for a time that would be safe, she said. Yes. And in the meantime I was standing in hallways with tea, she said, believing I had imagined the whole thing. believing I was wrong about what I felt. Do you understand what that does to a person? To be told, even indirectly, even by silence, that what you feel isn't real. He said nothing. She could see by the look on his face that he understood precisely, that this was not news to him, that he had been living with the knowledge of what his silence cost her, and had chosen it anyway. Chosen it because the alternative terrified him in ways that had nothing to do with her, and everything to do with power and law, and the machinery of a world she had only glimpsed, and she was angry at him for it. She was genuinely, legitimately angry, in the way that anger is sometimes the truest form of respect for what something should have been. She was also, underneath the anger, standing in a road in a snowstorm, looking at the man who had tracked her into the dark, not to bring her back for the pack's sake, but because he could not let her leave, believing she was nothing. There was a distinction there. It was not a small one. She turned and looked at the road ahead. The town was still miles away. The night was not getting warmer. I'm not going back to the pack house, she said. A pause. Okay, he said. Not tonight. Okay. There is nothing okay about any of this, she said, but she felt the edge of something that might distantly be dark humor. I need to not be in that house. I need to not be around the councils and the elders and Elder Wren and all of it. I need to be somewhere that is just, she stopped, exhaled. Somewhere that is just me for a little while. He was quiet then. I have a cabin, he said, about a mile east of here, off-road. I go there to be outside the pack structure sometimes. It's stocked. It's warm if you light the fire. No one from the pack goes there. No one would know. She looked at him. I'm not asking to come with you, he said. I want to be clear. I'll give you directions. I'll tell you where the key is. It's yours for however long you need it. He held her gaze steadily. I'd rather you were in a warm cabin than walking to town in this. She was quiet for a long moment. She thought about the diner in the valley town, the one she had driven through months ago, in a different life. She thought about $73 and 19% battery, and the specific way this cold had decided to find every gap in her clothing. She thought about the stone in her chest, and how it was not quite as heavy as it had been 40 minutes ago, and what that meant, and whether she trusted it. How do I get there? She said. The cabin was exactly what he had said. Small and cold when she arrived, but with wood stacked beside the door and kindling in a box and a fireplace that drew well. She had the fire going within 20 minutes. The single lantern on the table needed a new wick, but she found spare ones in a tin drawer and managed it without too much trouble. There was food in a locked cabinet by the window. He had given her the combination. 3 numbers she repeated to herself on the walk here. Canned goods and dried pasta and coffee in a sealed jar, and 2 thick wool blankets, folded on the bed that smelled of cedar and wood smoke, and something specific that she refused to identify. She sat in front of the fire with a mug of coffee and looked at the flames and tried to take an honest inventory of herself. She was an Omega. She had always been an Omega, which in the world she occupied meant something specific and mostly unflattering. It meant she was at the low end of the pack hierarchy, meant she was expected to be grateful for inclusion and to ask for little. She had spent her life being told, in various ways both loud and quiet, that what she was would never be enough for someone like Caden Vane, whose bloodline was older than most pack histories, whose authority extended past Thornvale into governance structures she was only beginning to understand. She had been told this so often, and in so many registers that she had almost believed it. She had almost accepted the story that what she felt was wishful thinking, projection, an Omega's blind, reaching toward the nearest available warmth. But she was not wrong about the bond. She had known she was not wrong, even in the worst of her doubting, even standing in the hallway, with the cups of tea going warm cold in her hands. She had felt the bond the way she felt her own breathing, automatic and constant and requiring no decision. It was not a thing she had invented. And Caden, standing in a snowstorm road with snow in his hair and his hands open at his sides, had confirmed it, which left her with the question of what she did with that. The fire crackled. The cabin was warming slowly, the kind of warmth that starts at your feet and works upward, honest and steady. She pulled one of the wool blankets around her shoulders and held the mug, and tried to think clearly. He had denied her to protect her. She believed him, not because she was naive, not because she was so hungry to be believed that she would accept any story that let her do so, but because the mechanics of what he described made a terrible kind of sense. She had heard of the old laws. She had heard them spoken of in the way that people speak of things that are dangerous and real. With that particular careful brevity, an Omega with a formal mate bond to an Alpha King became, under those laws, pack property in a way that made her individual agency conditional and revocable. She had heard of women who had entered that arrangement believing it to be protection, and discovered it to be a cage that fit too well to be broken from the inside. He had not wanted to put her in that cage. He had chosen instead to put her in a different kind of harm, the harm of believing herself unmated, unanswered, wrong about her own deepest instincts. She was not fully willing to forgive him for that choice, but she was willing to acknowledge that it was a choice made from something other than indifference, which was a meaningful distinction, even if it did not resolve everything. She slept eventually. The fire held through the night. She did not hear him arrive. She woke to a sound that might have been a branch in the wind, or might have been footsteps on the porch, and she lay in the blankets, listening, and then she heard the specific sound of wood being added to the porch stack, the soft thud of cut logs placed carefully, and she knew. She lay still for a while after that, feeling the warmth of the cabin, and the weight of the blankets, and the particular quality of the silence that exists when someone is outside a door and not coming in. He had said he was not asking to come with her. He had kept that. He had also, apparently, walked a mile in the remaining dark of the night to bring wood to a cabin where a woman was sleeping, who had told him she was still angry. She got up and made coffee and opened the door. He was sitting on the porch steps, his back to the door, looking out at the clearing, where the snow had softened overnight into something thick and blue-gray in the early light. He turned when she opened the door and looked at her without speaking. She leaned against the door frame. She held out the second mug and he looked at it for a moment before he took it. "You brought wood," she said. "You'd have run out by this afternoon," he said. "How long have you been out here?" He looked out at the clearing. "A while," he said. "I didn't sleep." She said nothing. He held the mug in both hands the way she had held both mugs in the hallway of the pack house, as if warmth was something to be held on to carefully, something that could not be taken for granted. She watched him do this and felt something shift in her. Something that she had been holding rigid relax by one precise degree. "The council meeting," she said. "The things Elder Wren said, the indicators she mentioned. How much time do we have before she presses again?" He looked up at her. There was something in his expression that was slightly different. She thought. Some adjustment to the fact that she had said we. "A few weeks," he said, "maybe less. She doesn't let things go." "What would change it?" Mara said. "What would make the old laws not apply? Are there conditions, exceptions?" "There are," he said carefully. "If the mate bond is formally acknowledged by the Alpha in open assembly before the council can act on it, the mate herself retains full personhood status under the older covenant. But it requires," he stopped. "It requires that the Omega consent freely and publicly to the bond, which requires that she know about it, which requires—" "The thing you couldn't tell me," Mara said. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. The morning light was growing, turning the clearing from blue-gray to something pale and silver that was almost beautiful. "You've known about this provision," she said. "The acknowledgement clause." "Yes." "For how long?" A long pause. "Since summer," he said. "Since about 3 weeks after you arrived." She let that sit in the air between them. 3 weeks after she had arrived. Which meant he had been carrying the knowledge of both the bond and its potential resolution since the beginning of summer, and had said nothing through autumn and winter, had let her believe the silence was its own answer, had let her make tea for two, and stand in hallways, and doubt everything she felt in herself. She was angry again. She let herself be angry, cleanly, without trying to resolve it into something more comfortable. "You were afraid," she said. "Yes," he said. There was no excuse in his voice. Just the word, plain and acknowledged. "Of the council." "Of what acknowledging the bond would mean for you," he said. "Before you had a chance to know whether you wanted it. I kept telling myself I would wait until you chose it. That I would know when you were ready. That there would be a clear moment." He looked down at the mug. "There's no clear moment. I understand that now. There is only the choice and the cost of not making it." Mara looked at him for a long time. She thought about who she had been before Thornvale. A woman who had learned to need very little, who had cultivated a precise and functional self-sufficiency. Not because she preferred loneliness, but because loneliness was predictable. She knew its edges. She knew where it ended and where you were safe from it. She had come to Thornvale on a friend's recommendation, had arrived intending to stay 3 weeks, and had stayed 4 months, for reasons she had told herself were practical. The pack needed someone to manage the archive. She needed the income. The timing was convenient. Reasons that had been, she could see now, a very tidy fiction she had built, around a pull she had felt on the first day in the kitchen, when a tall man with dark hair and an open coat had walked in and looked at her, and every internal compass she possessed had swung and pointed and stayed. She stepped off the porch and sat down beside him on the steps. Not touching, an inch of cold morning air between them. She felt him go very still in the particular way of a man who is managing something large and keeping it managed. "If you acknowledge the bond in open assembly," she said, "and I consent, what does that mean for Thornvale? What does it mean for your relationship with the council?" "It means I've chosen an Omega mate," he said, "which the council will not like, which Elder Wren specifically will argue against loudly, and probably for a long time, which some of the other packs in the region will see as a political statement." He paused. "And it means I've kept a mate bond from the council for the better part of a year, which they will also not like." "So there are consequences," she said. "There are always consequences," he said, "for everything that matters." She looked out at the clearing. A bird moved in the tree line, something small and quick, a chickadee or a nuthatch, there and gone. The snow was unbroken in the clearing, except for the track of Caden's footsteps, coming in from the east, crossing from the trees to the cabin steps in a straight line that had no hesitation in it. She had looked at that track when she opened the door. She had noticed that it did not wander, did not show any sign of circling or deliberating. He had walked straight to the cabin, which meant he had known exactly where he was going. "I'm still angry," she said. "I know," he said. "I need you to understand that this conversation doesn't resolve that," she said. The months of silence, standing in that hallway, that's not. She stopped. "It's going to take time." "Yes," he said. "I'm not agreeing to anything right now," she said. "I'm asking questions, I'm thinking." "I know," he said. He was looking at the clearing the same way she was. "I'm not asking for an answer. I came out here because I couldn't." He stopped, pressed his mouth together. "I couldn't let you leave thinking what you thought. Whatever you decide, I couldn't let you walk away believing I didn't feel the bond. That was," another pause. "That was the one thing I couldn't do." She felt, in the center of her chest, the stone she had been carrying since the hallway. It was smaller now, not gone. She did not think it would be gone for a while yet, but smaller, reduced by conversation and honesty, and the specific weight of 2 mugs of coffee on a cold porch in the early light. She was an Omega, and she had always been told that meant she was less, that her instincts were not to be trusted, that her feelings aimed too high, that the bond she felt was a symptom of wanting rather than a signal of truth. She had almost believed it. She had come very close, last night in the hallway, to believing it permanently, and walking away from Thornvale with the belief settled in her like scar tissue. She had not been wrong. She had felt a true thing and been told it was nothing, and she had nearly let the telling overwrite the feeling. That was the closest she had ever come to losing herself entirely. She was not going to let it happen again. Not by him, not by Elder Wren, not by any structure of law or hierarchy that required her to be smaller than she was. "What does the acknowledgement look like?" she said. "In practice. What actually happens in the assembly?" He looked at her. Something had shifted in his face, careful and precise. "The Alpha makes a formal declaration before the full council," he said. "Names the bond. Names the mate. The mate must speak for herself. Consent cannot be given by proxy. The council can object but cannot override a freely given consent under the old covenant. It becomes binding." He paused. It's on record. Once it's done, it cannot be undone without the consent of both parties." "And the old laws about pack property," she said, "about an Omega becoming an asset of the covenant, superseded," he said, "by the consent clause. Her free public consent elevates the bond above the property provisions." She was quiet for a while, processing this. The law was old, and it was ugly, and it had teeth, but it also had a door in it, and the door opened from the inside. She noted, with something approaching grim appreciation, that the framers of the old covenant had put the door there. Someone had put it there on purpose. She chose to believe it had been a woman. "I'm not making any decision today," she said. "Okay," he said. "Or tomorrow, probably." "Okay. But I'm not walking to town," she said. "I'm going to stay in the cabin for a few days, and I'm going to think." He nodded. He wrapped both hands around the mug and looked out at the clearing and did not push. She observed this. The restraint of it. The way he was sitting beside her without pressing his advantage, without the cascade of argument and persuasion that would have been available to him. He had followed her into the snow and told her the truth, and brought wood, and made no demands. She puzzled this carefully. It was the kind of evidence that accumulates. The days in the cabin were quiet in a way she had not experienced since childhood. The quiet of a place where nothing is expected of you, where the only urgency is the fire, the only clock is the light changing in the windows. She cooked simple things on the small cast-iron stove. She read from the cache of books on the low shelf beside the fireplace. Histories, mostly. A few novels with cracked spines that had clearly been read multiple times. She went outside and walked in the clearing and into the trees at the edge, far enough to be in the forest, close enough to see the cabin's smoke rising. He came once a day. Always in the morning, he brought things, more wood once, a cloth bag with bread and cheese and apples, from somewhere. Another time, he stayed no longer than she invited, and she found herself, by the second day, extending the invitation by another 10 minutes, and by the third day, by something closer to an hour. They talked about things that were not the bond. About the pack's history, about the region, about things that had happened before she came to Thornvale. About her life before, which she had rarely talked about with anyone, because it required a degree of trust she was slow to extend. She found herself talking. She found herself listening to him talk, and noticing that he listened to her with the whole of himself, without the half-attention she had learned to expect from people with more authority and more standing than herself. On the fourth morning she asked him about his father. He was quiet for a long time. The fire was going, and they were both inside, sitting across from each other at the small table, mugs between them, and the quiet of the cabin held the question, without rushing him. He was a strong alpha, Caden said finally. By every measure the pack respected. He made good decisions for Thornvale. He was consistent, which is its own kind of strength in a long leadership. A pause. He treated my mother as a covenant asset for the last 12 years of her life. She could not leave without pack permission. She could not maintain relationships outside the pack without council approval. He did not do it with cruelty. That was almost worse. He did it as if it was simply the natural order of things, as if he had looked at the old laws and found them reasonable. His jaw tightened. I watched that. I watched it for 12 years. I made a promise to myself when I took the alpha position that I would not do it, that I would not allow the bond to become a mechanism of containment for someone else. She looked at him across the table, and instead she said quietly, "You contain the bond itself." He looked at her. He did not argue with this. She could see that he had already seen it, had seen that his solution to the problem of control had been its own form of control, had kept her in a different kind of not knowing that was perhaps not as formal or as what his father had done, but was in its effect similar. He had made a choice about what she was ready for without asking her what she was ready for. He had protected her by deciding for her. The difference between him and his father was not as wide as he needed it to be. "Yes," he said. "I'm not saying it to hurt you," she said. "I know," he said. "I know that. I'm saying it because I need you to understand what I need," she said. "I need to be told. I need to be given the information and the choice together. Not one without the other. The protection without the information is it's just a gentler cage." He was very still. She watched him receive this the way that honest people receive difficult truths. Not with argument or defense, but with the particular quality of attention that looks like pain because it is. Because being told accurately where you have failed someone you care about is painful, and should be. He received it without flinching away from it. "Yes," he said again. "You're right." She looked at him, across the small table, in the cabin he had given her without condition. She thought about cages, and about doors, and about the woman she had been on the road 3 nights ago, with $73 and a dying phone, walking toward a town she had been through once in a different life. She thought about the specific feeling of being told that what she felt was nothing, and the specific different feeling of standing in the morning, cold on a porch step, being told the truth without amendment. She thought about the assembly, the declaration, her own voice speaking for herself, as the law required. Consent cannot be given by proxy. She had spent her life being reduced, by hierarchy, by title, by the inherited architecture of a world that had decided what an Omega was worth before she had any say in the matter. She had been reduced so consistently and for so long that she had begun, at her most exhausted, to participate in her own reduction, to reach for the smaller story, because it asked less of her, because it was less likely to be taken away. She had come very close to the road being the final iteration of that story. She had come very close to walking away from the largest and truest thing she had ever felt, because a door had closed in a room she was standing outside of. She was not going to be smaller than she was. "I need to ask you something," she said. He looked at her. "When you acknowledge the bond," she said, "in the assembly, in front of Elder Wren and the council and everyone who is going to make it very difficult for both of us. When you say my name out loud in front of all of them, is that a political act or a personal one?" He did not hesitate. "Both," he said. "It has to be both. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. You deserve the honest version." A pause. "But the personal one comes first. The personal one is why it happens at all." She held her mug with both hands and looked at the fire. "If I do this," she said, "if I agree to speak at the assembly, I'm not doing it as an Omega who got lucky. I'm not doing it as someone who is grateful to be included. I'm doing it as someone who has a right to be there, and a right to choose, and a right to be more than what the old laws wanted to make me. Those are the terms. Those are the only terms," he said, "that I want." She looked at him then. He was looking at her with something she had no better word for than recognition. The particular way someone looks at you when they are seeing you as you actually are, not as what they need you to be. She had felt the bond from the first day. She had felt it every day since, through all the silence and the uncertainty and the hallway and the road. She felt it now, steady and clear and undeniable, the way a compass needle is undeniable, the way north is undeniable. It was not a small feeling. It was not the kind of feeling she had ever been able to talk herself out of, and she had tried, and it had held. She was done trying to talk herself out of what was true. "There's going to be a great deal of difficulty," she said. "Yes," he said. "Elder Wren is going to make it as hard as she possibly can." "Yes, and some of the regional packs." "Yes," he said, "all of it. It's going to be complicated and political, and some of it is going to be unpleasant." He looked at her steadily. "And you should know all of that going in, because you deserve to know all of it." She considered this. She thought about unpleasant and complicated and the particular texture of the fight she could see coming. The one where she stood in an assembly room and said her name out loud and meant it. The one where she claimed what she had a right to claim, in front of people who had built their authority on the premise that people like her did not claim things. She thought about what it would feel like to be reduced again, to have Elder Wren look at her with that particular brand of dismissal that powerful people reserve for the people they have decided do not belong. She thought about what it would feel like to hold her ground anyway, to be the version of herself who was not smaller than she was. She thought it would feel like something worth having. She set her mug down on the small table. She looked at Alpha King of Thornvale, the man who had followed her into a snowstorm to tell the truth, who had brought wood in the dark and sat on porch steps without asking for anything, who had spent months in a silence that was wrong and had finally named it. And she looked at him the way she had looked at the road 3 nights ago, with the full weight of a decision. "When is the next full council assembly?" she said. Something happened in his face, careful and precise and very, very still. 2 weeks, he said. "The 1st of the month." "I need the 2 weeks," she said. "I need to know more about what I'm walking into. I need to understand the law and the objections and what my rights are at every stage of the process. I need to not be surprised." "I'll tell you everything," he said. "I know," she said. It was the first time she had said "I know" to him about anything, and they both felt the weight of it. "I know you will, that's why I'm considering it." She picked up her mug again. The fire was good, and the cabin was warm, and through the window the clearing was bright with snow in the morning light. She thought about spring, which was still weeks away but was nevertheless there, present, in the way that coming things are always present, in the quality of the light, in the particular way the snow at the edges of the clearing was beginning, almost imperceptibly, to soften. She had spent enough winters to know the feeling. It was the feeling of what comes next beginning to organize itself beneath the surface of what is. She was an Omega who had walked out of a pack house in the middle of a snowstorm with $73 and a dying phone and a stone in her chest. She was a woman who had stood in a hallway and heard the worst possible version of the truth and survived it. She was a person who had spent her life being told she was less than what she felt herself to be, and who had, in a cabin in the woods with a mug of coffee and 2 weeks ahead of her, decided she was done with that particular story. The bond was real. She had always known the bond was real. And she was going to walk into that assembly room and say so, in her own voice, on her own terms. And she was going to stand there while Elder Wren and the council and the old laws and the accumulated weight of a hierarchy that had never wanted her there did everything they could to make her feel small. And she was going to stay standing, because she knew something now that she had almost let them take from her. She had never been wrong about what she felt. Not once. The flaw they had named in her, the omega reaching too high, feeling too much, claiming what was not hers, had never been a flaw. It had been a compass. It had pointed true, every time, even when she had tried to doubt it. Even when she had stood in a hallway and held 2 cups of tea and listened to a door close. She had always been oriented toward north. She had simply been waiting for the room to admit it. 2 weeks later, when the snow had turned to the first soft rain of approaching spring, and the light through the assembly hall windows was pale and clear and honest, Mara stood at the center of the room and looked at Elder Wren and did not look away. And when the moment came, she spoke her own name and said yes, clearly, without amendment, and felt the stone in her chest dissolve entirely. Not because the fight was over, it was not. It was only beginning. But because she was finally, fully, undeniably herself in a room that had been built to tell her she was nothing. And the telling had not worked, and she was still standing. And the bond between her and the man beside her was written into the oldest record of the pack, in her voice and in her choosing. And no law and no council, and no version of the world that tried to make her smaller than she was, would ever be able to say she had not been there.